So, O.J. Simpson went to Nicole's house that night, furious about what had happened earlier in the day. He wore a ski cap, brown leather gloves, and he had a knife. He knocked on the door, and when Nicole answered, he pulled her outside of the house and stabbed her to death. While this was happening, Ron Goldman walks up to the house to return the glasses, and he sees O.J. Simpson killing Nicole. So O.J. turns on him and kills him too. Shit. Then he goes over to Nicole, who is still alive, and very precisely and very effectively, he slits her throat. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. We're a weekly variety podcast where each week I tell Adam Cox all about a topic that I think he'll find both fascinating and intriguing. We dive into the stories pulled from the darker corners of true crime, the annals of your old unread history books, and the who's who of extraordinary people. We give you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering. I'm your host this week, Kyle Reese.
And I'm your co-host, Adam Cox.
And after 5 weeks, we're finally back for a season 2 of the Compendium.
I know, it's been a while. I feel refreshed and raring to go, ready to be intrigued. It's been a really dull 5 weeks. I've learned nothing new.
I must admit, I was quite nervous to get into the studio today, just because it's been so long.
Yeah, it's like going back to school, isn't it? We've had summer off, we've had fun, and now it's back to it.
Well, in today's episode of the Compendium, we're exploring an assembly of ways where justice is loose, but the evidence is tight.
What?
What? No clues there?
No, once again, it might be season 2, but I'm still confused as ever.
Well, on today's episode of the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things, I'm going to be telling the story of O.J. Simpson!
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a little bit gutted because obviously it broke a couple weeks ago that he died. And actually, I'd written this episode just before we went away to Australia.
Ah, okay.
And so the fact that it was breaking news across the world that he had died just like last week was like, fuck, I've missed another point, man. I've missed it. I'm not topical. But what is it that you know about O.J. Simpson?
So he was a huge American football star, and that's how he started his career. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what team he played for, but then he made that move, I guess, as he was finishing his sports career, moving into TV and film. So I think one of his most famous film series is the Naked Gun series with Leslie Nielsen.
Surely not Leslie Nielsen.
Don't call me Shirley. So he was famous for all the kind of slapstick comedy of those at the Airplane movie and Naked Gun, and I guess that was one of O.J. Simpson's big breaks as a movie star.
Yeah, that's it. Because I guess when he was coming towards the end of his career, he needed to make sure that he had the next move planned, if you will. And I think that one of the things that he thought that he would do really well at is like working in TV and production and films and things like that. So he kind of set the wheels in motion to carve a career for himself after. So I recently picked up Jeffrey Toobin's book, The Run for His Life. And so he's this American lawyer, blogger, author, legal analyst for CNN. So over the years, he gained international fame for his coverage and analysis of various high-profile legal cases, including, of course, the O.J. Simpson trial. So if after you listen to this episode, and if you're convinced that O.J. Simpson in fact did it, because I'm going to say it right now, this is not an unbiased, impartial podcast on whether or not he did it or not, because the motherfucker did it. He killed his wife. And if you believe that as well, then go read his book because it's just brilliant. Now, by the way, does the name Jeffrey Toobin ring any bells to you?
No.
You may remember during lockdown, I think it was like 2020, there was this huge scandal involving this journalist who got himself fired from the New Yorker after he was caught giving himself a little treat after a Zoom call. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, vaguely.
Yeah, well, that was Jeffrey Toobin because he left his camera on after a Zoom call.
Oh.
And yeah, he pretty much showed everyone at the New Yorker his little soldier, I guess.
What a way. Does that end his career?
Well, that's the thing. I hope it doesn't. Because the thing is, though, like there'll be loads of people out there that'll be like, oh, yeah, what a goofball. And they probably won't go read his book. But if you can put that aside, go and read his book because it's just brilliant. If you want a proper account on everything around O.J. Simpson, then this is the guy that you should be listening to.
Okay.
Or the book that you should be reading.
Well, I will consider that depending on how your story goes.
But also, if you're not a reader, then I would highly recommend the brilliant podcast called You're Wrong About with Sarah Marshall and Michael Hobbs, who do an incredible job of giving an in-depth analysis of all the different elements of the story. And I think there's like 5 episodes in the series, but it's really annoying though, because for some reason they didn't finish the series, so it's left you on a bit of a cliffhanger. But in those 5 episodes, they go really in-depth in a lot of the themes that is covered about the trial, the racial tensions. It's just brilliant. There's also a 5-part documentary series called Made in America, where each episode is like an hour and a half long, and they go really deep into detail. So I'll link all of these in the show notes. So after listening to, of course, your favorite podcast duo, Adam Cox and Kyle Reese, then go and check out some of the sources that we have in today's show notes.
Hopefully we do this story justice then.
I hope so. In today's episode, I'm going to be telling you everything that you need to know about what happened, how O.J. Simpson murdered his ex-wife and her friend, Ron Goldman. I'll tell you about the infamous white Bronco chase, the trial, and all the events following the verdict. And as always, as I like to say, this one's a doozy. And just so there's no doubt about what the conclusion is going to be today, he did it. He did it.
If you're looking for a or an impartial view, then, read the newspaper.
Yeah, go somewhere else, because this isn't it, because we are talking about a cold-blooded murderer. And also unapologetic as well, because he is a big piece of shit. But we'll get onto it.
Rest in peace.
But before we get onto that, should we do all the latest things?
Let's do it.
This is a segment of our show where we catch up on all the week's happenings and share a quick tidbit, strange fact, or laugh at a bit of weird news from the past week. So Adam, it's been 5 weeks, we've been off and we're finally back after a little adventure in Australia. Can't believe it's gone so quickly. 5 weeks, man.
It has. And to be honest with you, I have done no preparation for this because I've been on holiday, Kyle.
You've been just chilling. Well, actually, I was like determined to write 4 episodes when we were out, but it's just every day has just been so bloody busy.
Yeah.
They just had no time whatsoever. But oh my God, Australia.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
We saw the reef. We went into the mountains, the rainforest. So much to see. And to be honest, actually, I do have something that we can talk about today, because remember the trip where we went to the Blue Mountains?
Oh, yeah. The entire day was foggy as hell.
Exactly.
We saw nothing.
We were driven around in this minibus to the Blue Mountains, which is this really scenic area where you get to see the 3 sisters, these rocks. And the driver took us to around about 6 different lookout points, and all you could see was fog and mist. So we saw nothing, but the pictures looked lovely. So imagine if you do go, it will go on a sunny day.
Yeah, make sure you have access to the pictures of what it should look like, just in case it's really foggy.
But we still had a really good day. And one of the reasons we had such a good day was because of our driver. He was really entertaining. He kept spitting out all these facts about Australia. And there's a couple that stuck with me. And one was about the Australian accent and where it came from.
Oh, yeah.
So he was saying, obviously, Australia is a part of the colony or part of the Commonwealth.
Bunch of criminals.
Yeah, and so the English, when we first discovered, and I use quotations with that because obviously we didn't, when we landed on the side of Sydney and we basically commandeered it for ourselves, we sent a lot of our convicts and criminals initially to Australia. And this was around our 1800s. That's the sort of the period where we're sending convicts over. So it's about that sort of period. And I think when they would send the convicts over, they'd also send alcohol. And a lot of the alcohol didn't last the trip. So wine would go bad. I think beer would go stale. But one bit of alcohol that did survive and last the trip was rum. And so rum formed a part of their early currency that they'd used.
Did they not say that for each adult that was living in Australia at the time, they had something like 16 shots of alcohol per day? That's how much rum that they had.
Yeah.
They had a lot of rum.
There was a lot of rum to go around.
So people were finely tuned.
Yes. So people would drink rum a lot and were basically drunk a lot of the time. And so what they think is that the Australian accent has come from the drunken slur of the people at the time drinking too much rum. And so I think you've got all these people that are coming to Australia. They're constantly drunk. And then that somehow rubbed off on those that are growing up there and coming to Australia. So people dropping sort of vowels or shortening words and things like that, that's all stemmed back from people being too drunk.
But is that true, though? What are your sources, Adam?
Well, so I've looked at a number of newspaper articles that have corroborated, because we thought like this guy is just like making stuff up to entertain us. But he said that most experts believe the Australian accent, known for its flat tone, nasality and elision of syllables, this is a newspaper, I'm not saying that you're nasally, Australia, developed from the mix of dialects found in the early colony, whose residents included convicts and settlers from across Britain and Ireland. And various myths have arisen to try to explain certain features of the Australian drawl, including the claim that Australians mumble to avoid swallowing flies. But this latest theory suggests that colonies' heavy drinking played a role and appears to have largely been welcomed in Australia. And yeah, that's where it's come from. And a few people have said that the way that the pitch of the voice rises and falls is this drunken slur. But I don't know. Whether we'll know the exact truth, probably not. But people back then were drunk a lot.
So what you're saying is that when we go out on a night out down Prince of Wales Road on the Strip and everyone's really drunk at 2 a.m. in the morning, everyone's essentially Australian.
Yeah, essentially. And I guess if you're around enough people and you maybe try and act drunk or you impersonate accents that you're around, and so that kind of rubs off on other people that were arriving. And so kids would be there sounding drunk, but they hadn't touched a drop of rum.
No, not yet. Not yet.
But yeah, that's my latest thing for this week.
I mean, just for me, Australia was just incredible. I mean, I had high expectations for the country anyway. And all of those expectations were just completely surpassed because Australia was just incredible. We visited Sydney, then we went up to Cairns. We spent most of our time up in Cairns visiting the rainforest, which is unbelievably hot. We went scuba diving.
Snorkeling.
Yeah.
On hikes. We almost died in a gorge by wearing flip-flops, which you should not do. But
But anyway, we're really chuffed to be back for season 2 of the Compendium podcast. And hopefully this year is going to be the best year ever.
We also received quite a lot of sort of suggestions whilst we're away. So we're definitely looking at some of those ideas that people have sent in for season 2 as well.
That's it. Can't wait.
Cool.
But yeah, should we get on with the story?
Let's do it.
So Adam, O.J. Simpson was born Orenthal James Simpson in 1947 in San Francisco.
That's what the O stands for, Orenthal.
Yeah, Orenthal.
I did not know that.
It's a strange name, isn't it? So we'll skip his early life because it's not important. The only important thing that we need to know about him at this period is that he had no idea he was going to grow up to be a cold-blooded murderer. That's the thing that we're certain about. OJ goes on to become one of the most famous American football players of all time. And he plays for the Buffalo Bills from 1969 to 1977. And then the 49ers in San Francisco from 78 to 79. And he starts getting close to retirement age, and he then becomes determined to make a name for himself following his eventual retirement. So in the lead up to this, he starts doing really small parts in movies and in television and things like that. Now, as you mentioned earlier on, he, of course, was in Naked Gun, but he was also in Naked Gun 1, 2, and 3. So I didn't realize he was in all 3 of them. And he's also done others too, but like Naked Gun is what he is obviously most famous for. So he catches the bug for acting and he decides that he's going to start up his own production company, and he starts casting himself in all sorts of lead roles. And Adam, he's not good.
I love the fact that he had his own production company where like, I'm going to star in this.
No one's casting me, so I know if I own the production company, then nobody can say no to me.
Write the theme tune,
sing the theme tune, kill the theme tune. What? So he also starts doing a lot of sports commentary. Like imagine when there's a football game on and they cut to the commentator and they're standing at the edge of the field. It's that kind of stuff that he is kind of doing. And all of this kind of works out pretty well for him because he manages to carve out a persona for himself, which eventually transcends his retirement from football. And at his height, O.J. Simpson is extremely famous to both black and white Americans, largely because he's so personable and so relatable on camera, but also because to African Americans, he is this black athlete that has managed to transcend those racial lines. So to them, he was this representative figure that kind of said that if I can see it, then I can be it kind of thing.
Yeah, good role model at the time.
Exactly. And then to white Americans, he was just this huge sports hero that everyone just loved. America's got its issues with race. We all know that. This isn't a podcast about that. outside of obviously O.J. Simpson, but they were able to put those types of things aside and see him for the brilliant athlete that he was. And O.J. Simpson, he didn't really pick a camp. Like when journalists would ask him, like, what's it like to be a black kind of successful athlete in America today? And he used to say, like, I'm not black. I'm OJ, you know? So during this time, he just had this massive universal appeal to all Americans.
Did he shy away from that question then?
Well, it gets really complicated because when his trial comes around, the prosecution team will point out that actually he never identified or even gave back to the black community. In fact, he tried very hard to distance himself from the black community.
Right.
But we'll come on to that later on. It's really fascinating. So he marries his high school sweetheart around the age of 20 and they have 3 kids together. And for OJ, his life is pretty damn great. Like he's an athlete, he's successful, everyone loves him. And then at the age of 30, his football career ends and he has a whole other career lined up for him. And the cracks in his kind of wholesome persona that he's kind of created over the years, this is when those start to emerge, right? So he gets divorced from his wife and it's discovered that he'd been cheating on his wife pretty much their entire marriage. So following the divorce, he ends up meeting an 18-year-old teenage girl called Nicole Brown. And when they first meet, Nicole was the waitress in a restaurant. They fall in love, they start dating, etc. And almost immediately from the very beginning, OJ is extremely controlling. At the time, Nicole was living with a gay male roommate, which OJ Simpson did not enjoy. And so he forces her to move in with him. And I mean, I use the term forces, but remember, he's an extremely famous, rich, successful athlete. Like he is one of the most famous people in the world. So I don't think anyone would need much persuading. If someone says, do you know what? Just come and move in with me. Look at my mansion. Look at this gorgeous mansion. You've got a private swimming pool. You've got a wardrobe of your own. I'll give you this car.
Yeah, and if she's 18 as well, that's going to seem pretty exciting, I would have thought.
Oh, exactly, yeah. So I think if someone said to me, like, oh, you're living with roommates? Oh, do you want to come live with me in my mansion? I'd be like, hell yes!
Like, bye.
See you, gay mate. But I think obviously the use of this terminology just acts to foreshadow what's to come. So later, after she then moves in with him, he insists that she quits her job because he's like, what do you need a job for? He's like, I have all the money that you'll ever need. I'm going to support you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to give you everything that you need.
Which sounds great until he then says, you can't do these things though.
Exactly. So soon after this, he starts controlling who she can see, where she can go, what she's allowed to wear. And eventually, it's just impossible for Nicole to do anything that doesn't center around O.J. Simpson and his needs.
Right.
And so, as you can probably guess, the control eventually turns into emotional abuse and then physical violence. And then each time Nicole tries to get away, as with all abusers, he then just promises that he's going to change and it won't happen again, etc., etc. And we know a lot about the abuse that took place because Nicole actually started to document all of this in her diary. She started taking pictures of her injuries, which she would then store in a safety deposit box because she genuinely feared that one day he might kill her. So
Really?
Even from this early stage, before they've had kids or anything, like she already is fearful of him. She's already in abusive relationship and she knows it because she's documenting it.
Yeah, and I guess she's obviously feeling she can't leave or escape very easily.
Well, that's the thing as well. So we'll come on to that in just a second. Because she even says to herself, like, if anything ever happens to her, she wants there to be evidence that he did it.
Wow, that's really... She must have been so much fear to document that and this is why I'm doing it.
Exactly, yeah. So Nicole was stuck. She was also young. She didn't have a job. She had no opportunities outside of the marriage. But also, OJ starts to employ several of her family members as well. So they too are relying on him financially. So escaping the abuse wasn't going to be easy because so many people in her family depended on him. I
was going to say, like,
financially.
What, aside from the emotional abuse and maybe not feeling like you could escape, what was keeping her there? But it seems, yeah, if they broke up, a family would lose their livelihoods.
That's it. Yeah, it's crazy. So she's completely trapped. So together they end up having 2 children, Sydney and Justin. And initially, Nicole thinks that the abuse will stop once they have children, but it just doesn't. He's also constantly cheating on her as well, even more so when she falls pregnant. And his justification is that he doesn't want to have sex with her when she's fat.
Fucking hell.
I know.
Sorry.
Oh, Adam,
Sorry.
did you just swear?
I did because I just thought that was horrendous.
I don't think I've ever heard you swear. Listeners, you heard it here first. Adam dropped the F-bomb.
Sorry, I take it back.
So he 100% believes that he's entitled to sleep around with anyone that he wants while she's pregnant. But the thing is, though, even after she gives birth, nothing changes. His excuse now was that she wasn't losing the weight fast enough. And he actually believes that she shouldn't have been allowed to gain any more weight than what a newborn baby physically weighs.
So not the additional water
Nope.
and everything else that's needed, the additional
The
skills.
giant hands and the huge clown feet. No, not allowed.
What the hell?
I know, he's a piece of shit.
Where did they get this information from? Is it purely from her diaries or is it from other people around at the time?
It's a good question. I don't know. A lot of this comes from Jeffrey Toobin's book, wherever he gets his resources from. So it's going to be from interviews that he's conducted and obviously from her diaries.
Yeah.
And also the thing is, though, throughout their entire relationship, the police are constantly being called out to the house for domestic violence. And so this is just an awful situation that Nicole is in. And in the Made in America documentaries, they play a lot of the 911 calls, and you can just tell how petrified she is because in these calls, you can hear him in the background, and all you hear is this rage in his voice. So there is just no question that this was an extremely violent relationship. So finally, in 1992, after 7 years of marriage, Nicole finally files for divorce. She gets her own little place, but they don't sever ties completely because they've got 2 kids together. And as a way for Nicole to keep the family together, she wants to take a little bit of a step back from the relationship, living together, and restart dating O.J. Simpson again. And slowly her feeling is that they can start mending the relationship and they can build things up nice and slow, build up the trust again. Because again, as all abusers do, they promise that they won't do it again, that they love them,
I
etc.
was going to say, did she generally believe that if she's filed for divorce, but then is willing to build?
She wanted to. She wanted to make it work.
Yeah.
Like she wants the best for her kids. And she does love her husband, right?
Right, okay.
And this does work for a while, but again, he just keeps slipping. When he doesn't get his way, he starts threatening to cut her off financially. And he even threatens to take the kids away, telling her that because he is famous, he has the means to care for the kids better than she could ever do it. So I get it. It's a bit of blackmail. So I understand why you would want to keep him sweet, even though you don't want to be in a relationship with him or married to him anymore.
Yeah. And was there a danger of him ever being abusive to his kids, though?
Well, there's no evidence of that. Their kids were very young anyway at the time. So OJ just does whatever he can to just keep maintaining control over Nicole. So he starts following her wherever she goes with friends, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what he would do is he would often park outside her house and just wait and watch, just like an absolute creep, even sneaking up to watch through the windows to see if he can see anything going on. And eventually, when Nicole is 35, she decides that she is now done. Like all the bullshit, the following, the stalking, the manipulation, she wants out and she wants a clean break. So she moves into her own little place with the kids, and OJ will only be involved as much as he needs to be for the sake of the children. But other than that, that is it. She is done.
Good for her.
So she's made the decision. So for the first time, Nicole is genuinely happy. She's out socializing on her own. She's thinking about a career and building up kind of her own independence. And of course, as is the case with all abusers, OJ just cannot deal with this at all. Because before now, she has always come back to him. He's always said, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. She's always forgiven him. And then the cycle just starts again and again. And so this is the first time that he's realizing she's not coming back. So one day, one of the kids is having a dance recital. Nicole invites the whole family to come out and watch. She is there with her sisters and her mom. OJ comes separately, but Nicole doesn't save him a seat next to them, right? So he has to go and sit somewhere else in the auditorium. And this just makes him absolutely furious because he can see them all sitting together, having a great time. They're all happy. And he's just sitting there on his own. So he's just furious. This just drives him mental.
Yeah, he'd probably like the anger raging inside of him.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine him sitting there just seething.
Venting.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh.
So after the dance recital, the family go to dinner to a restaurant called Mezzaluna. And it's a place that Nicole ate at all the time with the kids. And she knew all of the staff. She's super friendly with the management and all of the staff. But she tells OJ that he's not invited to come and have dinner after the recital. So they have dinner, and then afterwards the family head home. And halfway, Nicole's mother realizes that she's left her reading glasses at the restaurant. So Nicole says that she'll call the restaurant, and she speaks to one of the wait staff, a guy called Ron Goldman, who she knows socially. And there's loads of kind of speculation of how well she knew this guy. But according to the sources that I've read, they were just platonic friends that would occasionally meet on nights out. But there is speculation that there may have been involved, but I don't believe it at all. They were just friends. It was just, oh, you work at that restaurant that I go to with my kids all the time, and you're really friendly and you make my kids laugh. And I've seen you on a night out a couple of times, and that's it.
Yeah.
So Ron agrees that he will drop the glasses around her house once he finishes his shift. So around midnight that same evening, a neighborhood couple find Nicole's dog wandering the streets, and the dog is barking and seems really agitated. And they also notice that the dog's got a lot of blood on its paws. So they decide that they're going to take the dog back to Nicole's house. And when they get there, they find Nicole and Ron Goldman dead in the front yard. They'd both been stabbed to death in what looked like an absolute fit of rage.
Damn, and left on the front lawn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a premeditated murder in a sense. It's not someone that's hunted someone out to go specifically do it.
Sure.
It feels very much like a spur of the moment thing.
So as we know, Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman were the victims, and there was a whole court case about it, and I'm not going to keep you in suspense because he was found not guilty of their murder. But I'm here to tell you that he did it. We know he did it. He even makes jokes about doing it. So I'm just going to... Exactly. He's an absolute piece of shit, and we're going to cover all that in a minute. But I'm just going to tell you exactly how he did it and what happened. So, O.J. Simpson went to Nicole's house that night, furious about what had happened earlier in the day. He wore a ski cap, brown leather gloves, and he had a knife. He knocked on the door, and when Nicole answered, he pulled her outside of the house and stabbed her to death. While this was happening, Ron Goldman walks up to the house to return the glasses, and he sees O.J. Simpson killing Nicole. So O.J. turns on him and kills him too. Shit. Then he goes over to Nicole, who is still alive, and very precisely and very effectively, he slits her throat. And the reason why they think that O.J. Simpson knew how to kill in this way is because at this precise moment, he was filming a new TV series called Frogmen about Navy SEAL divers. And for maximum authenticity, producers put the cast through rigorous training, including how to look inconspicuous by wearing balaclavas and gloves, etc. And one of the things OJ would have learned was how to kill someone by slitting their throat like a Navy SEAL would do, very precisely, very effectively. So people have speculated that this is how he knew how to do this.
Wow, well, I take back what I said where it sounded opportunistic. He actually went there and did that. I did not know he dressed like that either.
Yeah, he was fully kitted out. So after killing Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, OJ drops one of the gloves and the ski cap that he was wearing. He then drives home in his white Bronco and parks on the side of the house because he is organized for a limousine to be waiting to pick him up to take him to the airport on a work trip. So he can't park in the driveway because he doesn't actually want the driver to know that he wasn't home.
Right, okay.
This is going to stand as kind of his alibi.
Right.
So O.J. Simpson then jumps over the fence. He sneaks around the side of the house. And while he's sneaking past his guest house on his property, a friend of his, Kato Kalin, who is staying in the guest house, hears something through the wall, like footsteps or a scuffle, but he doesn't actually know it's O.J. Simpson. And then the noise is gone, and then he forgets about it.
Right.
But he very clearly remembers someone walking down the side of the guest house. On the way into the house, O.J. drops the other glove at the back of the guest house.
Right.
He goes inside the main house. He gets rid of his clothes. He gets dressed. He collects his luggage. He gets into the limo where the driver is waiting for him. And he goes to the airport ready to catch his flight to Chicago for his little work trip.
Wow. To think that you're just going to go do that now after what you've just done.
What a bastard. What a piece of shit.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. Of course, there's a lot of speculation throughout this case, which we'll cover some of it, but ultimately, O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife and her friend, Ron Goldman. What are you thinking so far?
Well, I was a bit concerned that we were going to go in and say, that he definitely did it and no non-bias. But based on what you said, he does sound like a piece of shit and he does sound like he did it. And is this all the evidence that they were able to pin on him, I'm guessing, and this is a concise or condensed version.
Yeah, this is based on the evidence they found. But the thing is, though, when it comes to the court case, they played cards that just fed into more social issues and racial tensions that ended up finding him not guilty. And we're going to cover some of it because it's really fascinating. Because I don't know if many people know this, but he did go through a second trial, a civil trial, where he was found completely guilty. But he couldn't be prosecuted for it because he'd already been found not guilty in the criminal trial. But we'll go through that in a moment and why that's significant. So the police are called, obviously, because the neighbors have stumbled upon this gruesome scene. And when they get there, it doesn't take them long to realize that this is Nicole Brown's house on account of the pictures with O.J. Simpson around the house. Here's the gut-wrenching thing about this whole ordeal. Their children were both upstairs asleep this entire time.
No way.
So thank God they did not wake up. So this animal killed his ex-wife while his kids were asleep in their beds and then just left them there to potentially find their mother dead in the front yard. Isn't that so sick? So the police find the ski cap and the bloody glove, and at this precise moment, the police don't know that O.J. Simpson is involved. Initially, they think that if Nicole was targeted, then whoever did this might also be after O.J. Simpson. So they go to O.J.'s house and they see the white Bronco parked by the side of the house. And when they inspect the car, they see blood on the driver's side door and blood on the inside carriage on the driver's side.
So he hasn't even, I guess he didn't have time to do a bit of a cleanup, but I would have thought the reason he had the gloves and the mask and maybe he did it outside was to leave minimal DNA or anything there. But then he's done all this and didn't think to wipe down his car.
Yeah.
What an idiot.
What an idiot. And so the presence of blood gives the police reason to believe that something is up. So they jump over the fence and they force their way into property. And this is where things get murky. Because later on, O.J. Simpson's defense team will say that the police only jumped the fence so they could plant evidence.
Oh, okay.
And that evidence was the other bloody glove that O.J. Simpson dropped when he was sneaking around the side of the guest house. And so because of this, the entire defense will revolve around a very racist police detective who was there that night called Mark Furman, right? So he's going to be very important to the story. And the claim was that he had planted the bloody glove to pin the murder on O.J. Simpson.
That was a thing of the 90s, wasn't it? Where the police were found to be quite, well, convicted of racist.
That's it, yeah. And actually, this plays a huge part of it. And it seems like the police brutality and police racism against minorities comes in these different waves. And by the time that this case had happened, or by the time that O.J. Simpson had murdered Nicole Brown, they were just coming or recovering from the Rodney King brutality, which we'll cover in just a minute.
Okay.
And you'll understand how that led to them finding him not guilty. And so because of this, the entire defense will revolve around a very racist police detective who was there that night called Mark Furman. And the claim was that it was him who had planted the glove in order to pin the murder on O.J. Simpson. And they based this on various pieces of evidence where Mark was caught out saying and doing some very questionable racist stuff in the past. They dragged that all up a bit. And there's no question, like, he was a racist piece of shit. So, for instance, he was being interviewed by a screenwriter who's doing some work on the LAPD, and she says that she spent hours with Mark, and almost the entire time, all he did was spew the most awful, racist things against African Americans. And on top of this, he was also known to exert excessive force when arresting African Americans, but also he once tried to sue the LAPD pension fund after they refused to let him retire early because, as he puts it, working with all these blacks has made me super racist, and so he wanted to retire early.
That's what's made him... Oh, one... Yeah.
Also, over the years, Mark had also been one of the officers that had been called out to the Simpsons' house after he had beaten up Nicole. So the defense team speculated that not only was he a racist piece of shit, but that he had also disliked O.J. Simpson from the very start for beating up his wife. And so as a result, they say that Mark planted the glove in order to incriminate O.J. Simpson for the domestic violence against his wife.
Right. But I guess, is there anything found against this policeman? Like, obviously, he's not a good man, but was he actually doing a good job with the case in terms of following it through and going by the rule
They
book.
don't really go through that, really. I think just in spite of that, they pulled up his racist behavior. They used the backdrop of everything that happened with the LAPD and Rodney King, and they used that to their advantage. So I don't think whether or not he was a good police officer or not, it was his character that was pulled into question.
Yeah, and I just wondered if he actually did do anything that did jeopardize the case, or actually he did follow the rules in this instance, even though he is a piece of shit.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And so the entire trial will then end up coming down to this glove that supposedly was planted by the LAPD and Mark Furman. But here's the crazy thing. The glove was by far the least incriminating piece of evidence against O.J. Simpson in this case because they found a trail of blood leading from the scene where he murdered Ron and Nicole, leading out to his parked car on the street. They also found blood in his car. They found a blood trail leading from his car over the fence, down the path along the side of his house, all the way up into his bedroom. Also, there was only 3 people's DNA in that blood. It was his, Ron Goldman's, and Nicole Brown's.
So the evidence is overwhelming at this stage.
Yep.
And all this is brought up in court, and yet he's not convicted.
Yet the defense team claimed that this Mark Furman planted all that blood and that glove. Come on.
How could he do that?
Exactly. If there's anything that life has taught us up to this point is that racists are not the smartest of people. Mark Furman could not have pulled that off in that time at the scene, both scenes.
He would have to have scooped up all their DNA into a pipette and then just drop that.
Yeah, and smear it.
And everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
It's mental. So when the police locate O.J. Simpson in Chicago, they call him up at his hotel room and they tell him, like, I'm sorry to tell you, Mr. Simpson, but your wife, Nicole, is dead. And it's the biggest play of mediocre acting you've probably ever heard in your life. Much like what we saw in The Naked Gun. Like, he's terrible.
I was going to say.
So he's wailing. He's saying, no, not Nicole. And then he says, I'll come home. And then he hangs up. And not once does he ask, how did she die? It could have been a car accident. Could have been an overdose. She could have fallen and hit her head. Not once does he say, how did she die? You'd want to know that, right?
You'd want to know some detail, or you wouldn't hang up. You would not hang up.
No. Piece of shit, right?
Yeah.
So OJ flies back to LA. He goes in for voluntary questioning without a lawyer. And when he's there, the police are starstruck that they're talking to this huge star. And OJ knows this. So he's just this incredibly kind of like cavalier, kind of casual, arrogant piece of shit in front of them.
Please don't say that he offers to give them his signature or anything. How did I know this?
Yeah. So the interview lasts for 30 minutes. And when they're speaking to him, they notice that he has a cut on his third knuckle on his left hand, which is super, super swollen. And it's literally oozing. And when they ask him how he got it, he says he can't remember. So it's a pretty serious cut on his hand. They don't even flinch, right? And later on, when he finally lawyers up, he then says that he had actually cut himself on a glass when he was in Chicago. But I'm sorry, you would remember that, especially if it was just the day before, right?
Yeah, I think it was on the knife you used to kill your ex-wife.
Exactly. So they also ask him about his whereabouts at the time of the murders, what contact he had with Nicole in the hours preceding, and his activities following. And he just denies any involvement. So after the interview, as you quite rightly pointed out, he signs a bunch of autographs for the officers, and this will be the one and only time that he is interviewed by police, because the very next day he lawyers up, and of course, the police can't get anywhere near him.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, anyone in any kind of mourning state would not be offering up autographs.
No, exactly. What a piece of shit. I think that's the tagline for the show, right?
What a piece. Is that what we're naming this?
We should call this episode What a Piece of Shit. So it's 4 days after Nicole's murder. It's her funeral. And in America, they quite often do these open casket affairs where they will display the body to mourners at like a wake. And Nicole is dressed in an outfit that goes all the way up to her chin because O.J. Simpson had almost decapitated her when he murdered her. God. And apparently at the funeral, O.J. leans into the casket. He kisses Nicole on the lips and he says, "I'm so sorry, Nick. I'm so sorry." What you sorry for, Mr. O.J.? What are you sorry for? Murdering your wife?
How dare that he gets to be able to do that afterwards.
Sickening. It's sickening. So OJ hires some pretty high-profile lawyers. It's a guy called Bob Shapiro, and OJ's and Nicole's oldest and best friend, who they would hang out with all the time. He's a lawyer called Robert Kardashian.
Ah, yes. This is how the Kardashians sort of got their name a little bit, wasn't it? In terms of,
I mean, apart from kind of Kim Kardashian's dirty sex tapes.
yeah, no, what I meant was, I guess that's where the name came from.
Yes.
He got a lot of notoriety from this case.
That is it. So we know him because, of course, he's married to Kris Kardashian. And I honestly think that this is just so deplorable because I don't think that I would be able to take on a case where my best friend was accused of murdering his wife, who is also my best friend, just on the off chance
It feels
that
like
they did it.
It feels like you're too connected or close to this case.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be on it.
Stay clear.
Why was he allowed?
Don't know. Money, fame, profile, I don't know. Who knows? So the thing is, as well, is that Robert Kardashian came out of retirement specifically to work on this case. So he wasn't actively practicing as a lawyer at this time. So Robert Kardashian and Bob Shapiro, they form what they call the Dream Team, and they team up to be O.J. Simpson's defense in his criminal trial. So as the police investigation is underway, it is eventually established that all of the evidence is actually pointing to OJ having did it. And they make moves to arrest him for Nicole and Ron's murder. But Bob Shapiro is like, no, because like our client is like one of the world's biggest celebrities. Like you will cause an absolute media frenzy. Is that really what you want? And remember, he's black. We've just come out of the Rodney King kind of affair. Do you want that kind of attention? And the police are like, okay, yeah, no, maybe you're right. So Bob Shapiro is like, what we'll do is we'll arrange for OJ to surrender to the police station tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. and it'll be nice and cordial, respectful. We'll keep it low profile and you can have him. And they're like, okay. Police are like, fine. But the next morning, OJ decides that him and his best friend, a guy called AC, are going to make a run for it. AC and OJ are like, they're inseparable best friends, right? They do everything together. They even both have the same white Bronco. So a lot of people believe that it was O.J. Simpson's white Bronco that they made their getaway in. But of course, remember, that was impounded now, right? So it was his friend's Bronco who had the exact same Bronco. They bought two twinning. So it's obviously not the one that's in question. It's AC's Bronco. So they get into AC's white Bronco and they make a getaway. So OJ will later claim that he just couldn't live with the idea that Nicole was no longer alive and that he was driving off with the intention to kill himself.
Or he couldn't live with the fact that he did it.
Exactly. But that's an absolute crock of shit because later in the car, the police will find his passport, $10,000 in cash, a wig and a fake moustache.
Oh my God, a fake mustache.
And also, during the entire kind of getaway, he was making his way down the San Diego freeway directly from Mexico.
I really want to see what he would have looked like in the wig and mustache.
So
I want to know how good this disguise would be.
I don't think he was wearing it just yet. So he was just bundled into the back seat while AC was driving, I believe.
Right, and he's gets to the border, puts on his new disguise.
And that's it. Oh, no one's going to recognize me. So meanwhile, the media are all patiently waiting for OJ to hand himself at the police station. Of course, that never happens. So when 11 a.m. comes and goes, the media are like, what's going on? Okay. So they start to piece things together and they discover that OJ, one of the most famous people on the planet, is now a fugitive making a beeline for Mexico in a white Bronco, and it becomes the biggest news story in the world at the time.
That is amazing in a way.
It's amazing. So Bob Shapiro and Robert Kardashian, they, of course, jump into action to try and control the narrative about what's happening. And immediately they hold a press conference and they tell the world that OJ is not on the run. He's actually off to kill himself. And that Robert Kardashian then pulls out a note that OJ has left and he reads it out live on television.
Right.
And it basically says, to whom it may concern, I've had nothing to do with Nicole's murder. I loved her. I always have. I always will. If we had a problem, it's because I loved her too much.
I mean, these defense lawyers are clearly doing a very good job in terms of trying, like, how are we going to save this shit show?
Exactly. He then goes on to say, please don't listen to what the press are saying, because he believed that him and Nicole had a great relationship. He then goes on this tirade of thanking all of his friends. He thanks like 30 people. It's really weird. And he says he doesn't understand why this is happening to him. Why does things always happen to me? And then he has the gall to say that at times, are you ready for this? At times, I felt like the battered husband.
Oh, shut up. He should have drove off a cliff.
He should have. He then says, please don't feel sorry for me. He's had a great life. Please think of the real OJ and not this lost person that he's become. And then he signs off with, peace and love, OJ Simpson. Isn't that just gross?
Yeah.
So this new story is unfolding live on TV with the police commencing this huge police chase pursuing OJ in this infamous white Bronco. There are helicopters all over the place and news station vans are all honing in on the situation and they're all just chasing after him.
Was this on TV, like the car chases that you see, which would like interrupt broadcasting or programming?
That's it. We all remember those moments because we've either seen snippets of it on kind of television that have been reimagined by Family Guy and in various documentaries. But here's the thing. Just describe what's happening. Describe what you think is happening right now. Imagine the scene.
What's going on?
Yeah. Describe the car chase.
Well, I'm imagining like this really like fast, like trying to get away from the police, like on this highway.
Swerving.
Yeah.
Beeping. Yeah. Like cars swerving out the way. Oh my God. Someone just
driving
hit me.
into trash cans.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorts. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the reality.
Okay.
Throughout the entire police chase, AC and OJ are just casually driving down the freeway at a cool 25 miles per hour. There is no speeding. There is no tire popping chains being flung into the road. There's no swerving. There's no attempt to force him off or to like get him to pull over.
Right.
There's none of that. It's just traveling down the road at 25 miles an hour.
They're like going way below the limit, right?
That's a violation. If we can't get him on anything, we can get him on driving too slow on the freeway.
I was just thinking, yeah, pin him on that.
Get him, boys. So OJ's just in the back seat. He's holding a gun and there are like 50 police cars trailing behind. And the world is just watching. And apparently on this day, this was the worst day on record for US soap opera ratings because everyone had tuned in to watch this, in inverted commas, high-speed car chase that we've all been brainwashed to believe that it was.
Oh, right.
And I mean, it's more like a police escort than a car chase. And it just goes on for miles and miles. And they're not going to get to Mexico.
I was going to say, do they like, will you pull over? And they go, sure.
Yeah. So there's a very good reason why they don't act aggressively. Because up to this point in American history, America was going through its latest wave of people speaking out against police brutality and violence against African Americans. Because it was only a couple of years prior, in 1991, that an African American guy called Rodney King was brutally beat up by the LAPD, and someone captured the entire event on camera. And so that ends up going to trial. And in spite of the video evidence of the LAPD beating up this guy, they are completely acquitted of any wrongdoing whatsoever. It's almost like George Floyd all over again. And so when this comes out, there's huge civil unrest across LA with people rioting and protesting in the streets. So like I said, it's extremely familiar to what we keep seeing time and time again.
Yeah, and I'm guessing off the back of that, people being very cautious of what's said and done.
Exactly.
Wow.
So in the aftermath of Rodney King, we have the remnants of these racial tensions between African Americans and the LAPD. So during the OJ car chase, the police don't want to be seen to be using excessive force against African Americans, especially with the whole world watching. It's not just caught on camera, it's literally live on TV. So the police just follow behind this white Bronco. And they do have a connection between like negotiators and O.J. Simpson over the phone, and they're trying to get him to kind of surrender. But O.J. is just like incoherent, and he's saying that he wants to go to his mom's house, and then he wants to go to Nicole's grave, and he's just all over the place. He's obviously just very emotional, regardless of what's happened. Like, it would be a very emotional situation. Oh, also, during the chase, Domino's Pizza has a 40% spike in sales while people are tuning in to watch the entire event live on television, because it just goes on for hours and hours.
Wow. A car chase special.
Car chase special.
2 pizzas.
Yes. An OJ and AC special. And people are cheering OJ on, especially amongst the African American community, who are, of course, still very much living through the aftermath of what happened with Rodney King. And rightfully, they have this distrust of the LAPD. So swaves of people are coming out onto the streets. and they'll be holding up signs and they'd be cheering on. They'll be like, "Go, OJ!"
As he drives past at
25 miles an hour.
It's like, quick, we're gonna miss it. Oh no, wait.
It's almost like a royal procession where the Queen's there just waving, right?
Feels like a parade.
So eventually the negotiators, they convince him to go back home. And when he arrives, he just sits there waiting for it to get dark in his driveway so that it's harder for the police helicopters to get any decent footage of him being arrested. And eventually he surrenders and he is charged with the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Obviously, he doesn't get bail on the account that he had his passport, a wig, and a fake moustache in the car. So they just lock him up for 6 months until his trial begins.
Oh, so he was in prison for 6 months before.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a long period of time. But I guess there's a big case, so a lot to
Huge case.
get ready.
Huge. And that's where we're at now, the trial. So the trial is just a complete circus. Every day is broadcast live on TV and it runs for 9 months in total.
Whoa.
Yeah.
9 months.
It's a long court case. Obviously, we're not going to cover everything because that's definitely a journey that you should take on your own, right? Being the compendium. But the important thing is that everything ends up coming down to the glove and whether or not race had played a part. So on the prosecution's team is a woman named Marsha Clark, who of course is played by
Sarah Paulson.
That's it. And a guy called Chris Darden, who is played by Sterling K. Brown in the Ryan Murphy's kind of People versus O.J. Simpson. Their initial strategy is to present a dual approach. They began by focusing on the domestic violence kind of aspect of things, and they are trying to portray OJ as having a motive and being capable of killing Nicole Brown because of his domestic violence history.
Sure.
The other part of the strategy was to present the huge amount of scientific evidence, including hairs, clothing fibers, and of course, the huge amounts of DNA evidence that they had in their arsenal.
How they managed
Slam
to do this.
dunk.
I know. So you say that and you just think, oh yeah, they've got this in the bag, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing regarding the DNA. In the early 1990s, DNA wasn't that widely understood by the general public in any way. So the prosecution team struggled to get the jury to appreciate the precision and the significance of having DNA in a case like this. And I don't know how true this is, but I read on Reddit that in order to explain what DNA was to the jury, they actually played that little animation at the start of Jurassic Park where they explain how they resurrected the dinosaurs, and then they get the little DNA, and inside the strands is a blueprint to all life, and basically they have to play that in order to explain what DNA is.
I mean, it feels like that sort of undermines what they're saying.
Oh, do you think?
Just like, why are dinosaurs involved in this? They've used dinosaurs to extract DNA from O.J. Simpson.
OJ killed the dinosaurs?
Yeah,
So
okay.
that apparently happened. So it goes something like a DNA strand, like me, is a blueprint for building all living things. And sometimes animals that went extinct millions of years ago, like the dinosaurs, they left their blueprints behind for us to find. We just had to know where to look for them. It was that kind of dialogue. And they hopefully try to explain the significance of it. But on OJ's defense team, their strategy was, of course, to undermine this weird, new, bizarre evidence that they called DNA.
That's crazy that they're undermining that and critiquing that.
Yeah, especially years later, if they're still practicing lawyers, I bet they now use DNA in their own defenses when they debunked it in this case. Are they still DNA deniers?
That's what I was thinking, yeah. How do they get away with that? Or people not... Obviously, people have now critiqued this case and everything. Yeah. But yeah, you'd think you're not a good person.
Yeah, yeah. Or like, I would love to go to one of Ben Shapiro's court cases today if he's still practicing law and just sit there. And if he mentions DNA set, I'll be like, fake news! DNA doesn't exist!
He's probably like a flat welder kind of person.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
I guess you just got to do what you got to do in the interest of your client, right?
Yeah. You just don't want to lose. That's the main thing,
No.
isn't it?
But also part of the defense is they were going to make this entire defense about race. And they think that they have a chance because all they have to do is convince 12 members of the jury, of which 9 happen to be African Americans, that this was indeed the case. And ultimately, this strategy ends up being successful. It works. It gets OJ acquitted of the murder of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown.
And didn't the defense have a hand in picking the jury? I know both sides do, but they obviously were trying to use this to their advantage by getting more African Americans.
Sure, they go through what they call jury selection. But here's the problem, right? So you got to think of the strategies that they're employing. So Ben Shapiro and his team are going, we want black people, we want black people, we want black people.
Yeah.
What is Marsha Clark doing? We want women, we want women, we want women. Why? Because their defense is the domestic violence stuff. And they think that, of course, the DNA is going to hold strong because that's scientific evidence. So that's the thing. That's where Marsha Clark went very wrong. She assumed that this was going to be a slam dunk domestic violence case, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
All right? So OJ's defense team, they make out OJ to be this huge hero of the African American community, which just couldn't be further from the truth, because ever since OJ made it as a celebrity, he actively worked really hard to disassociate himself from African Americans. And we see evidence of this because when asked, he always maintained that he wasn't black. He would say, I'm OJ, I'm not black. And that, in its words, is a dissociation from your race and your people and your community.
Yeah, I guess I don't know when he said that versus when some of the police brutality was happening, but it feels like a way of trying to be neutral, especially if he's got these sponsorships and things like that.
Sure, possibly, you're right. But get this. This will give you a sense of how he felt. So OJ lived in an area known as Brentwood, which is, of course, a very affluent, very rich white community. And OJ would have been one of a very small number of black people living in that community. So when he was being arrested outside his house, remember a huge crowd of African Americans had gathered to show their support? Well, while he was being arrested, a witness overheard him remark, what are all these N-words doing in Brentwood? He was really shocked by how many black people had gathered. And this becomes a big point of contention during the trial, which tries to prove that he tried to distance himself from the black African American community for his whole career. But regardless, the defense makes it all about race and corruption against the LAPD. And their whole defense pivots on this theory that this very racist detective, Mark Furman, had planted the glove to deliberately incriminate O.J. Simpson in the murders of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman. So the defense team suspects that at some point during the trial, there will be the question of whether or not the glove belongs to O.J. Simpson in the first place. They also know that O.J. Simpson suffers from arthritis in both of his hands. So they get him to stop taking his medication, knowing that this will cause his joints to swell up. Meaning that if the prosecution team do ask him to try on the glove in front of the jury, then the glove would not be able to fit.
And this is where that famous line came from. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit.
Exactly. So finally, the moment arrives that the defense team had been anticipating, and is one of the most iconic moments in the entire trial. Chris Darden, without Marsha's permission, says that he wants OJ to try on the glove to prove that it's his glove. So OJ gets up. They hand him a pair of latex gloves. Of course, that is to protect the gloves from any contamination because, of course, it's critical evidence. Then, in the most theatrical way that he can, he starts to pull on the gloves onto his hands one by one. He's like straightening his body. Something. He's trying to get them over his fat fingers and he's like, oh my God, it's not getting on. And he's pulling on, really emphasizing that they don't fit. And he's showing the jury as he gets kind of towards each stage of putting them on. And he's like, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. He holds up his hands and he shows everyone. But the thing is, Adam, they fucking do fit. I've seen that footage. They're on his hands. And apart from the
dramatics.
The dramatics of it all, they're on there, even with those latex gloves under there. I don't know, call me an idiot, but those gloves fit. They're on him.
But I guess his performance, where his acting did pay off, made people think like, oh, they can't fit. That can't be his glove.
Exactly.
But I feel like that's such a stupid thing. I don't know. Of course, if you are defending yourself, you're going to try and make an issue or a deal of that, saying like, oh, they're too tight, they don't quite fit, you know.
Exactly.
I would never have gloves that would take me a minute to get on.
So the entire courtroom, they're just shook and the gloves don't fit. And so...
they acquit.
Yeah, and that was well played by the defense team. Also, I feel really bad for Chris as well, because he's a black lawyer and he's defending a man who is still seen at this moment a hero by millions of African Americans. So he's literally seen as a traitor to their community. Also, Chris Darden, like, he was only brought into the case really late in the game because Marsha eventually realizes that this case isn't going to be as straightforward as she thought. It's not going to be a case about domestic violence. Instead, it'll become this case with these undertones of white versus black. So to dispel these optics, she brings in this black prosecutor to help appeal to the majority black jury. But even this is a misfire because later the jury said that the second that Chris walked into that courtroom, they knew why he was there.
Yeah, I can understand why Marsha would do that because she's trying to show, like, look, let's get him on the right reasons. But it's a play at the end of the day.
It is. It's like trying to clear all these distractions. Like, if I bring in a black lawyer, then it's almost no longer about race. We can focus on what it actually is about.
Yeah.
Which I respect that, but it just seemed to these people, the African-American community who was still really hurt by Rodney King, that it was a very obvious, calculated.
Yeah, and I think that's what perhaps comes across as slightly, are you being a bit dishonest here or whatever?
Yeah. So despite all of the evidence, remember we've got Simpson's cap, we've got his gloves, we've got his blood. We also have some blood-soaked footprints at the scene in a man's size 12, which just so happens to be Simpson's kind of exact shoe size. And get this, the brand of the shoe was by a guy called Bruno Manelli. Now, this particular shoe in a size 12, only 299 pairs of this particular shoe were ever made in the world.
So they're an exclusive shoe, probably quite expensive.
Mm-hmm. And O.J. Simpson was photographed wearing these same shoes only 9 months before the murder. And when he was questioned about it, like before he knew that the world had this photograph of him wearing these shoes, he was asked about it. He was like, I'd never wear those ugly ass shoes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so only 299 were made, and we have a photograph of you wearing them 9 months previous. And he was like,
did I?
Really?
Oh, I threw these out. They were horrible shoes. They didn't fit, like the gloves.
Yeah, so like, what are the chances of another murderer with the same shoe size as you? Like,
yeah.
Whose glove doesn't fit? Size 12 feet, but tiny hands? What kind of man is this?
Yeah, like a T-Rex.
So, in spite of all of this, during the closing arguments, OJ's lawyer gets up and says those very famous lines. It doesn't matter what's happened. It doesn't matter what you've heard. One thing that you need to remember in that verdict room is if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And then the jury is sent off to deliberate and decide on their verdict.
Mm. And having something that rhymes, they're a pretty clever defense team, you got to admit, in terms of the things that they used to build his case, because there's so much evidence. Like now, that stuff just wouldn't have stacked up, I don't think.
No, that's right. I mean, if I murdered someone, then I would want them on my team. Yeah. So it is expected to take days, potentially weeks, for the jury to come up with their verdict. And so immediately following closing statements, Bob Shapiro gets on a plane and he goes on holiday, only to be called back 4 hours later because the jury had decided their verdict. And it was unanimous. O.J. Simpson was declared not guilty on both counts of murder.
Wow.
And here's the shocking bit. Later, one of the black female jurors in the Made in America documentary openly admits that the jury decided O.J. was not guilty as payback for Rodney King. And I watched that footage and she said it. And it's disgusting.
Wow.
Yeah.
They've gone, but this white person died, but you killed a black person, so we'll take that.
That's it. Now, of course, obviously, they do interview the other members of the jury. Not all of them agree with this, but the rest of them said plainly that the prosecution did do a bad job. That's how they felt. They genuinely felt that. And they failed to provide decent arguments for a bunch of things. And they showed us a cartoon as if we were stupid. So,
yeah, I can understand. And like I said, the lawyers did a very good job in making a compelling case, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, at the time, let's pretend that DNA doesn't exist. I mean, would we see this case through a different lens? I don't know.
Possibly. If you didn't have that to say this was 100% him, you probably would.
Possibly. So yeah, while they were deliberating in the verdict room, they generally didn't think that beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty. So they found him not guilty. But I personally think it lands somewhere in the middle. I think that in part, racial tensions was a factor. I also think that the prosecution team, like you said as well, they probably messed up their strategy a little bit. They miscalculated a couple of things. It wasn't going to be a domestic violence case. There was going to be elements of race in there, and they just didn't account for that.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that Marsha Clark came into this trial believing that she could paint this picture of a domestic violence case that resulted in murder. She thought that she would win favor from the women on the jury. It wasn't until it was too late that she started to see the racial tensions at the heart of all this. And the thing is that even after OJ is declared not guilty, this meant that there was still a cold-blooded murderer on the loose, just stabbing people to death around LA. But the police never continued looking. And
Really?
I think that tells me that despite of the verdict, they all knew that he was guilty. They were pretty confident of it. Otherwise, they would have continued to search, right?
Yeah, they would have done. Absolutely.
So following the trial, OJ promises that he would spend all of his money and all of his time up until the day that he died looking for the person who did this. He didn't. Piece of shit. So obviously when the not guilty verdict was read out, both the Browns and the Goldmans were obviously furious. And I feel really bad for both families for different reasons. For Nicole's family, things were really complicated. So regardless of how they felt, they had to work really hard to suppress this because obviously their grandkids were at the center of this as well. So if they wanted to continue seeing them, they had to put their beliefs or their belief that he had killed their daughter aside because don't forget, OJ got custody of his kids back, right?
God.
Because remember, he was found not guilty. He didn't do this according to law. So of course his kids went back to him.
How did Nicole's parents cope with that, or her family, just knowing that, oh, we get to keep them, we get to see them this weekend and have to go pick it up from him?
Yeah. Isn't that gross?
Yeah.
As for Ron Goldman's family, they were relentless. They were not going to stop until OJ paid for what he did one way or another. So they actually take him to civil court, which is different to criminal court because in a criminal trial, the case is brought by the state against an individual accused of a crime, right? So there is a burden of proof on the prosecution who must prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which of course the jury did not find. Whereas in a civil court, they deal with kind of disputes between individuals. So in O.J. Simpson's civil trial, the Goldmans sue him for the wrongful deaths of their son and Nicole. The thing is that in a civil trial, the standard of proof is a lot lower than what it is in a criminal trial, which is based on the preponderance of evidence, right? This basically means that was the defendant, so O.J. Simpson, likely than not to have committed the crime? So based on the evidence, was he likely rather than reasonable doubt? Oh, there's reasonable doubt that he didn't do it based on X, Y, and Z.
But he's more likely to
have done because of who he was, the connection that he had, his past, like the evidence that was found at the scene, etc.
I think I get you, yeah.
And during this trial, prosecutors learned from all the mistakes that they made at the criminal trial. And during this trial, he is actually compelled to testify, which means that he has to get up on stand. And they question him about his history of domestic violence. They question his alibi, finding a bunch of gaps in his story. They re-examine the physical evidence, the gloves, the blood on his clothes, the bloody footprints that they found at the scene, in his car, in his house. They analyze everything. They also analyze his behavior following the murders as well. And in the Made in America documentary, you see footage of them questioning him, and it's plainly obvious that he's just lying through his teeth. You see times where he just doesn't have an answer at all and he just mumbles his way through and they're just constantly calling him out on things. So the civil trial goes on for 4 months and in the end, they find him unequivocally guilty and culpable of the wrongful deaths of their son, Ron Goldman, and also Nicole. And he is ordered to pay $33.5 million in restitution. But after this ruling, he immediately files for bankruptcy and he moves to Florida because in Florida, they have these really strict homestead exemption laws, which makes it difficult for creditors to force you to sell your primary residence to satisfy debt.
Right. So he was just doing any he could to get out of giving up his home and anything else that they could take him for.
That is it. So to make money, OJ would do these really sad and seedy nightclub appearances to make some money. He would end up signing some autographs at a mall, but every dollar that went into his pockets, the Goldmans would be just standing behind him going, yep, thank you very much. So he found it extremely difficult to make any kind of money whatsoever. So one thing he does try to make money on is from writing a book. He decides that he's going to write a book called If I Did It.
Oh my God.
Which talks about how he would have committed the murder if, in fact, he had done it. Ron Goldman's dad is like, I don't think so. He marches straight to court, but here's the thing. He doesn't get the judge to stop the book from being made. Instead, the judge awards the Goldmans full and complete rights to the book.
Really? So it backfires on OJ.
Yeah. So, like an absolute baller, the Goldmans publish the book. They still call it If I Did It, but they make the if the tiniest writing so you can barely see it. And it looks like the cover says, I did it.
No way.
And there is a picture of a bloody footprint that they find on the murder scene that belonged to O.J. Simpson on the front cover.
It's interesting take of this family to do that. I guess they're trying to find any way they can, obviously, to bring him down because they know the criminal justice system hasn't done that. To rather than just move on and try and put it behind you, they've actively done this, and that's quite an interesting way of trying to cope with it. I don't know how I would have dealt with this, but it's an interesting way that their family did this.
I take my hat off to them. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So basically, this means that the only money that he's actually allowed to keep is his pension and any money that he makes without the Goldmans finding out about, which isn't much because they are relentless. Like every time he makes a buck, makes a dime, they're like, pay up, murderer.
Wow.
Yeah. So here's something else that's deplorable. So O.J. Simpson is now a star of a new show called Juiced. It's a prank show. Right. Imagine you've been punked. But instead of that, it's like, you've been juiced. In one of the pranks, as himself, he tries to sell a white Bronco with a bullet hole circled with a Sharpie, and it's signed by him. And he puts an ad out in classifieds, and when someone who is interested shows up to see the Bronco, he jumps out and goes, you've been juiced.
How could he do this?
I mean, he does it, but he doesn't do it well because, no surprise, it lasts one episode and it doesn't get renewed. He's a complete piece of shit.
Yeah, how... If you felt any remorse whatsoever, you just would not do this, right? You just wouldn't.
He's just not very smart, I don't think.
No, he's a dumb idiot.
But he's trying to make money. So then in 2007, O.J. Simpson is attempting to earn some money illegally without the Goldman's knowledge by selling a variety of sports memorabilia. Most of it is his memorabilia. And he would literally just sign them and then just sell them for whatever he physically could get for it. So one day he hears about two guys, a guy called Bruce Romont and Alfred Beardsley. Now, they had been found to be selling a bunch of memorabilia out of their hotel room in Las Vegas. And OJ was claiming that they had stolen the memorabilia from him. In fact, they had actually purchased this memorabilia from a storage container, which had been auctioned off because, surprise, surprise, O.J. Simpson had stopped paying the lease on it. And so these guys bought up all of the memorabilia. So O.J. decides that he's going to gather a bunch of his tough little mates. They travel all the way to Las Vegas and they commit an armed robbery on these guys. And like idiots, they get caught on all the different cameras in the hotel. And they are just arrested and they're found guilty of armed robbery. And get this, the judge sentences him to 33 years in prison.
So to get their own back on the previous conviction.
And that's where he's been since 2017, because after 9 years, he's let out on parole for good behavior. And yeah, he's now a free man. So OJ is now 75 years old, living in a gated community in Las Vegas. And of course, up until the news broke on the 12th of April, 2024, he died after a secret battle with cancer. And that's the end of OJ Simpson, I guess. And I guess the news is just going to be filled with OJ clickbait for the next 2 months.
And that's kind of, the end of his story. So he only served 9 years in prison, regardless, obviously not for the crime or that specific crime. But he managed to lead a majority of his life as a free man.
Yeah.
That sucks, really, isn't it?
It's so sucky. And the thing is, though, now that he is dead, of course, the media have just been dredging up his life story and the key events in his life. And of course, the murder of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. But even after everything, people are still today really divided on all aspects of the story, whether or not he did it, some of the details, the relationship between Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson. Not that that warrants or justifies his murder, but when you read some of the comments online, people get really het up on what the dynamic was between Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown, as if it justifies their murder.
What happened, yeah.
But it just doesn't matter. You're splitting hairs.
Yeah. I think I can understand there being a lot of interest in the case because of how it didn't go to plan, or just out of this overwhelming amount of evidence that should have brought him down didn't. So I can understand a lot of interest, but I feel like we're still talking a lot about OJ rather than actually the people that lost their lives.
Exactly. So Elon Musk has also been on the record. He tweeted the other day, obviously he's just a completely detached idiot. So he tweeted that everyone makes mistakes in life and O.J. Simpson was no exception. However you feel about his alleged crimes, the juice brought so much joy to sports fans in his college and pro football careers and made countless people laugh with his antics in Naked Gun. May he rest in peace. What a piece of shit, Elmo.
Elmo. Yes, a new name.
Aside from the brutal murders, he was a fun dude. Like, get over yourself. How could you say that?
Yeah, you can't put like a problematic boss on the same line as a murderer. I was just looking whilst you were reading the last little bit there about his book. Apparently it reached Amazon's bestseller list after his death.
Really?
So if the Goldmans obviously are getting all the revenue from that, and we are obviously talking a lot more about O.J. Simpson right now, at least they're getting some kind of compensation from the fact that they won that civil lawsuit.
Good. I didn't know that. But I also guess finally O.J. Simpson can now rest knowing that his wife's killer is finally dead, because he did say that he would spend all of his time and all of his money trying to find the person who killed her.
Yeah, but now he can rest.
Yeah, he can now rest in peace. So I just hope at his funeral procession that it's led by a white Bronco meandering slowly through the streets with dozens of kind of cops in slow pursuit of his coffin.
Can you imagine? Yeah, that's one way to go.
And that is the story of O.J. Simpson and how he killed Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman.
And if you don't agree with us, then I'm sure there's podcasts out there which say he is innocent. So listen to that instead.
And I know the story is really huge and a lot of people still consider it really juicy. But as with many of these true crime stories, we need to remember that at the heart of the story, a 35-year-old mother was brutally murdered at the hands of her husband. Also, often overlooked in the story is a young man who was completely unconnected to O.J. Simpson. His life was just taken from him. And I feel so bad for Ron Goldman's family because in the midst of all of this, Ron often gets forgotten. Like, Ron was only 25 years old. He was working as a young model and he had aspirations to one day open up his own restaurant. And Ron, by all accounts, was a really decent, young, caring person. And his life was just taken from him because he was doing a good deed, returning a pair of glasses, and walked in on a man brutally murdering his wife.
Yeah, just wrong place, wrong time kind of thing.
But you guys, you go ahead, you dive down that rabbit hole because there's so much to uncover in the story, especially around the complexities of the racial tensions between the LAPD and the African American community. It will really help you understand that the way that the African American community is being brutalized today isn't something that's new. It was one of many different instances where time and time again, the African American community are being brutalized by people who are supposed to be protecting us. So despite this being the case, where 2 innocent people were murdered, this case surfaces a lot of hurt amongst the African American communities across the USA. So remember, there's so much for you to explore, from Jeffrey Toobin's book, Run for His Life, to the Made in America documentaries, with each episode being like a mini film in itself. So check those out. But yeah, that's the story of O.J. Simpson. Any last words?
Yeah.
What do you got?
One last thing, because I know when you were researching this, I snooped at some of your research. Wasn't there a video of Ruby Wax? So she's an interviewer, she's an American comedian, quite famous in the UK, and also like a TV presenter. She had interviewed him, did she not?
Yes.
And didn't he make a joke of like stabbing?
Yeah, he did.
When knocked on her door and was doing like stabbing signs almost.
That's it. Yeah. So she was at a hotel room. The door, someone knocks at the door. She opened the door and there was O.J. Simpson with a knife pretending to stab her like in the Psycho movie. And he was like, his face was right up at the camera and his eyes were really wide and then he just laughed it off. Piece of shit.
Yeah.
Check this out on YouTube. It's disgusting. The scene before that, they were walking through the streets and Ruby Wax was interviewing him and this woman walked up to O.J. and interrupts her and asks if she could shake his hand. And her comment was like, I've never shaken the hand of a murderer before. And Ruby Wax is like, does that not upset you? And he's like, nah.
Yeah, that's weird.
Doesn't upset me.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Very weird.
But yeah, that's the story. Should we run the outro?
Let's do it.
So here we come to the end of another episode of The Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. If you found today's episode both fascinating and intriguing, then subscribe and leave us a review. But don't just stop there though. Schedule your episodes to download automatically as soon as they become available. Remember, we're on Instagram at the Compendium Podcast, so stop by and say hi or visit us at our home on the web at thecompendiumpodcast.com. We release new episodes every Tuesday, and until then, remember, in the court of public opinion, the glove always fits. See you next time.
See ya.